Îl avem invitat astăzi la TVR Iași pe Steven Clark, director în cadrul Direcției Generale pentru Comunicare a Parlamentului European. Bună ziua! Mă bucur că sunteți aici la Iași, la Televiziunea Română.
Thank you very much for having me today here.
Spațiul Schengen. O mare frustrare pentru români. O frustrare pe care am văzut-o în urmă cu 3 zile, activată de vizita ministrului de interne din Austria, Gerhard Karner, care, în ciuda așteptărilor noastre, nu a dat nicio speranță României pentru ridicarea blocajului privind aderarea țării noastre la Schengen. Pentru mulți români devine o problemă că vom rămâne mult și bine în afara spațiului Schengen. E o nedreptate care ni se face, această așteptare nedefinită?
Well, firstly I'd say I understand the frustration that Romanians must feel about this situation because the country has done a lot to prepare to enter the Schengen zone, and of course, you know, a lot of things that have happened in this country have been aimed at that and have, according to the European Parliament at least, earned its place in Schengen. And in the European Parliament itself, for quite some years now, has taken a very firm position that Romania and Bulgaria belong in the Schengen zone, and that should happen as soon as possible. Of course, we're in the framework of European law here, and the process is one which requires unanimity in the European Council, and that is the element which does not yet apparently exist. But as recently as October last year, both Commission and Parliament reaffirmed their conviction that the Schengen area should be extended to include both Romania and Bulgaria.
Pare că de fiecare dată câte o țară din vestul Europei se găsește să se ridice și să-și exercite dreptul de veto împotriva aderării României la spațiul Schengen. Ce mai rămâne din principiile Uniunii Europene dacă, de exemplu, presupunând prin absurd că România se va decide în viitor să își exercite dreptul de veto constant în privința unei țări în diverse ocazii sau cu ocazii importante ale deciziilor Uniunii Europene?
Well, first thing I'd say is perhaps never say never. Things in Europe tend to progress. They can progress sometimes unexpectedly, and this is something we've seen over and over again. And I wouldn't exclude a change of mind in the Council, and that this can finally go ahead. But the broader question that you raise is that of unanimity, this principle of unanimity. Now, over time, this has been eroded. This has been a necessary part of the enlargement of the European Union. We were up at 28 member states for a long period, and this, I think, required a streamlining of many of the procedures. Now, this is always extremely complicated and difficult, and the unanimity principle has remained in place for some things. Now, we recently ran this conference on the future of Europe. This is a widespread consultation exercise involving citizens, parliamentarians from across Europe, national parliaments as well as the European Parliament, and representatives of national governments and the Commission. And this conference, one of its conclusions, this unanimity principle should be further restricted. We can't continue going ahead with this potential blockage. So your question, in the long run, is this going to be a problem? Well, it could be for quite some time, but I think there is a dynamic in the direction of limiting this, the possibility of an individual member state to block progress. That is happening, that exists.
Tocmai din acest motiv, știu că au existat foarte multe discuții în legătură cu schimbarea acestui principiu al unanimității. Există vreo șansă ca în viitor să se schimbe acest mod de a vota, pornind de la această problemă, care ar deveni o țară care ține să demonstreze ceva astfel?
I mean, the European Union, as I say, is an organization that advances in fits and starts. It often advances in reaction to specific circumstances and specific crises. The follow-up of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which I just mentioned, is ongoing. It's not over yet. There is still legislation being prepared by the Commission reforms being prepared by the Commission to be presented to the other institutions. These may take this question further. We may have further progress in this area, particularly ahead of other things that are due to happen in the near future, such as a further enlargements to new member states of the European Union, which will put the accent once more on the need for the procedures to be more streamlined. I would, however, say, and I think this is something that everybody would agree on, that there are certain things that all member states would say are of superseding national importance. And there are some things where I suspect unanimity will remain a principle indefinitely. But it needs to be restricted further and further, and I think the Schengen process is one where that could happen. We are still with 4 countries outside the Schengen area in the European Union. The other 2, not so far mentioned, Ireland and Cyprus, are of course island nations, so this is something which perhaps makes things a little bit different in their case. But I'm convinced that we will have continental Europe fully on board before too long.
Alegerile europarlamentare de anul viitor. În 2024, în România, dacă nu se schimbă nimic, vom avea toate tipurile de alegeri posibile. Locale, parlamentare, prezidențiale și, nu în ultimul rând, europarlamentare. Cum se va reflecta această frustrare generată în prezent de faptul că românii sunt ținuți în afara spațiului Schengen în votul pe care îl vor da în cazul alegerilor europarlamentare?
Yeah. Well, having a lot of elections in the same year, it happens now and then, and it can be a problem. Of course, it does create a degree of voting fatigue sometimes on the part of the electorate. It can also sometimes create a little bit of frustration. You say last but not least, the European elections, I think, are actually the first in the series of elections that will occur in Romania next year.
Sau așa.
And that means, in a sense, the European elections might well be setting the tone for the political year to come. And I think, in particular, because European issues seem to be very much to the fore in the public debate in Romania at the moment, this could draw people's attention to the European elections as an opportunity to express themselves on European matters. So I'm hopeful that this will not be to the detriment of the European elections, that there are many other elections occurring during the year. I hope that what it means is that we will have a rich political debate which covers both European and national elections as the year goes by.
Sunt primele alegeri europarlamentare după Brexit. După provocările din timpul pandemiei, după ce am văzut și disensiunile din cadrul Uniunii Europene privind atitudinea vis-a-vis de invazia Rusiei în Ucraina și costurile tot mai ridicate ale războiului de lângă noi, credeți că euroscepticismul s-a diminuat față de ultimele alegeri sau, dimpotrivă, câștigă teren, mai ales în țările problemă, între ghilimele, ale Uniunii Europene?
Yeah, well, the situation could be very different from member state to member state. We ourselves do a lot of polling of public opinion across the European Union, and we do see there are sharp differences in how people perceive the European Union, the degree to which they trust it, the degree to which they wish to remain in it. I think the overall picture is that the events that you refer to, a series of crises, in fact, which go back to 2008 with the financial crisis, and then we had a huge issue around migration, which is still a live issue, of course. Brexit, and this surge in what you might call populist politics that occurred at that time, followed by the pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine. All of this put attention onto European themes. And I think in the figures that we see, at least, there has been a general trend away from Euroscepticism since Brexit in particular, because Brexit is, in fact, an illustration of what happens when Euroscepticism wins the debate, as it were, or wins the vote in this particular occasion, and a country leaves the European Union. It's striking that since that happened, many politicians who previously advocated departure from the European Union have stopped doing so, and there are no votes in saying this anymore, it seems to me, and it seems to us through our research. So that's one part of the picture. The other part of the picture, I would say, is that the crisis you mentioned, the pandemic, the invasion of Ukraine, these are things which no country can address alone. And it's clear that we all have an interest in the European Union of a unified approach and of solidarity with each other when confronting these matters. And I think that means that in public discourse, people understand that Europe is a question that is very much the fore. And if I can say so, that is reflected just, for example, in TV news. The faces you see, you will see the President of the Commission a lot more on the evening news everywhere in Europe than perhaps was previously the case. So there is a kind of a brand recognition, if you like, of European politics going on.
Ați anticipat prin răspunsul următoarea întrebare, care viza unitatea Uniunii Europene, care în contextul ultimelor provocări menționate din ultimii 2-3 ani, pandemie, inflație, război, această unitate ar trebui să fie singura opțiune pentru toate statele membre. Cum încearcă Bruxelles-ul să pună în practică această idee a unității?
Well, I mean, we can see that a lot has already happened, and let's talk about the most recent example, the Russian aggression in Ukraine. This could have been a moment when European countries diverged and everyone looked to their own narrow interests, particularly in relation, for example, to energy or historic relationships that exist between countries. This did not occur. In fact, the position of the European Union has been extremely solid, extremely united towards towards Ukraine and towards Russia in these circumstances. Of course, there are differences. Of course, there are still elements of national history which determine slightly different behavior. But it has been.
Ungaria, for example.
Hungary is an example, and I think also, but the question of exporting weapons is not. Is one which is more controversial in some countries than in others, and we don't see an absolutely identical behaviour on behalf of all the countries of the European Union. But what we do see is a collective approach which has remained firm and has remained solid, and this has, I think, been extremely important in terms of how Europe has addressed what is in fact an assault not only on one of our neighbouring countries, but on a country which was striving in a European direction and striving towards what we would consider the fundamental values of Europe and of a democratic system.
Cum ar trebui combătut extremismul și ascensiunea la viitoarele alegeri ale unor partide eurosceptice, așa cum în România, ca și în alte locuri din Europa, este cazul unui partid anume, AUR, cu un succes incredibil în ultimii ani la public, la votanți.
Right. It's not really for me to comment on the Romanian situation. I don't feel expert enough to talk about the situation here. But what I can say, certainly, is that for many years now, we have seen a fragmentation of political opinion and of electoral habits. And we have seen what we would broadly define as populist or sometimes extremist parties entering the political sphere, gaining votes and becoming a significant presence on the national political scene. And this is, if this is what's happening in Romania, it's by no means unique. In fact, it's perhaps come rather later than in other European countries. I think, again, this is something which was very much around as a concern at the time of the last European elections in 2019. And if a lot of the rhetoric around those elections was, well, this is the great populist wave is going to happen and take over the European Parliament, the European institutions. This didn't happen. There was also a sharp increase in turnout in those elections, perhaps because people did not want that to happen. And indeed, what we call the same centre or the mainstream in Europe held firm, albeit in a rather more fragmented form. This is a pattern of politics I think we're going to have to get used to. The old style politics of the left versus the right, and that was basically it. I think this has gone, and we're into a much more fragmented political scene, just as we're in a more fragmented environment in many other ways, for example, when it comes to the communication and media environment.
Prelungirea războiului din Ucraina va accentua această fragmentare care astăzi poate e acceptabilă la nivelul Uniunii Europene?
Yes, and this is a huge challenge. This war in Ukraine is dragging on. Clearly, I mean, it was at the beginning. I don't think anybody expected it still to be so stalemated at this point in time, and this places enormous pressure on the body politic in Europe generally. What encourages me is that so far, although we see disagreements and we see debates, we do not see a fundamental break in the unity that Europe has achieved towards this question. And indeed, what we've also seen is many of the consequences that have followed on the Ukraine war, which are more daily effects on daily life, such as high prices or the crisis with energy supply. These have been addressed, and you know, we really didn't know whether we were going to freeze this winter. In the end, we didn't, and I suspect this is in large part because of action that we took. There are still many problems to face, but it's clear that Europe as a whole has managed to step up and deal with these problems, and that's encouraging that there is a sustainability about this unity that we've managed to achieve.
Un exemplu, o analiză Bloomberg ne spune că țările din Europa de Est resimt tot mai puternic impactul financiar al războiului care a început în urmă cu un an și 2 luni. Pe măsură ce sunt acordate subvenții pentru energie, armatele sunt extinse, refugiații ucraineni sunt integrați și ajutați în multe țări vecine. Pentru a face față cheltuielilor, guvernele este europene au împrumutat deja 32 de miliarde de dolari în acest an. De 3 ori mai mult decât anul trecut. 3 state europene, Polonia, România și Ungaria, se numără printre primii 5 debitori emergenți pe piețele externe. Există această îngrijorare la nivelul Uniunii Europene, a țărilor cel mai grav lovite de invazia din Ucraina?
I think it does. Of course it does. And I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to spout any economic theory. But I think, obviously, high levels of debt, of public debt, can be a concern, and they can impact on the financial system more widely. And this is something we saw happening many years ago. But what has also happened in this period is that Europe has decided to mutualize some of its debt. And indeed, this came out of the COVID crisis originally, where the reaction simply was unprecedented and extraordinary. We look at this, the Recovery and Resilience Plan across Europe, and what we see is something which is, in real terms, larger than the Marshall Plan was after World War II. A lot of people don't realize this, and I think maybe the Europeans should be better at packaging this kind of thing, because this is a huge investment in recovery from the pandemic, which is in effect also going to be recovery from the effects of the invasion of Ukraine. This is billions of euros being mobilized. Of course, a lot of this is through debt, but a lot of that debt is actually being incurred not by member states, but it's being incurred by the European Union as such. This is a taboo that was broken, but extreme times maybe call for extreme measures. And I think it's a sign of the political maturity of the European Union that it was able to take that very difficult decision and move on into a new world.
O altă problemă la fel de delicată. Ungaria, Polonia, Bulgaria, Slovacia au impus unilateral restricții cerealelor ucrainene pentru a-și proteja piețele interne de un flux necontrolat de produse agricole din Ucraina. România nu a interzis importurile, nici tranzitul lor, dar a decis să sigileze, să monitorizeze transporturile. Cum va tranșa Bruxelles-ul într-un final această delicată problemă care nu e doar economică?
Well, this is still a decision which is open, of course, the renewal of the trade measures concerning Ukraine. The first thing to say, I think, is, it's very pleasing to see that Romania has taken this highly responsible attitude and stuck to its guns when it comes to respecting European legislation. That's a sign, I think, of great maturity in how this country has dealt with this problem. The problem exists, we can't deny that, and I think the Commission now, and the Commission, not only the Commission, the European Union as a whole, has to achieve a delicate balancing act between ongoing support for Ukraine, which is still a huge political priority. It's not something which comes without a price, but it's and between the needs of farmers and other economic sectors inside the European Union, and in this case, obviously, particularly in the eastern half of the European Union. I can't tell you how that balancing act is going to work out, but as we know, Europe is very good at finding compromises and solutions and workarounds for these difficult situations, and I guess this is what's going to happen again in this case.
Ne aflăm aici la Iași, în capitala uneia dintre cele mai sărace regiuni din Uniunea Europeană, provincia istorică Moldova. De ce credeți că politicile de coeziune ale Uniunii Europene și cele naționale nu reușesc să diminueze aceste inegalități, ba în anumite părți să le accentueze? Ce e neregulă?
I mean, everything takes a long time, and if you look at the figures, this country has benefited hugely from a net inflow of European cohesion funds, and now also add to that the resilience and recovery funds. If you're talking about things like building motorways, rail connections, or whatever, these things do take a long time. I flew to Iași from Bucharest yesterday, and I actually saw the motorway which is being built between the south and the north of Romania. I mean, it started, it's begun, the work is ongoing. I believe that it's largely Romanian contractors who are building this, so the money is there in the economy, it's helping people already. It's frustrating to have to wait, of course, for these things to be materialized. I think it's true in all the countries which have benefited a lot from inward investment from the European Union. There was a phase where it felt like it was taking forever. And there are the countries like Ireland and Greece and Spain and Portugal which benefited enormously after their enlargements. It was not until that fairly recently that you could consider the job done, kind of thing. So this is going to carry on. But let's not ignore the fact that the money is already being spent in Romania. This, I hope, most of the time will help Romanians and the economy here. I understand that in a total we're over 50 billion euros coming into net overall, coming into Romania on this basis. And it will continue. And I think also as we get into future enlargements and so on, there will be more coming this way. There are then decisions made, obviously internally in every country about where the projects start, where the priorities lie at the beginning. In any political organization, someone's going to be happier than someone else. There are choices to be made. I guess that happened here too. But I mean, it will ultimately happen.
S-a vorbit mult despre aderarea Ucrainei la Uniunea Europeană. Care sunt șansele, astăzi când vorbim cu contextul actual în care ne aflăm, ca acest lucru să se întâmple și cum privește Bruxelles-ul legătura cu procesul de reconstruire a țării vecine, a Ucrainei?
Obviously it's a huge question, but I think the most important thing to retain is there is a very formal decision by the European Union granting Ukraine candidate status to the European Union. On the same day as that decision was taken, a similar decision was taken about the Republic of Moldova. So these two countries are now on a path to accession to the European Union. Negotiations should begin, let's hope, towards the end of this year. In the meantime, work has begun to make this happen. Now, there is a lot to be done, and countries typically remain candidates for quite protracted periods, but in the meantime, there is an inflow of money that comes from pre-accession funds. There is help available at all kinds of levels to a candidate country, and this will apply to Ukraine and to Moldova. Then afterwards, there's going to be a lot of a technical process to make it happen. Of course, in the meantime, there's a war going on, and I guess that is something which has to be out of the way in some way before the
Republica Moldova, pentru că noi avem o sensibilitate aparte, românii în general, cu atât mai mult aici la Iași, față de Republica Moldova, ar avea o șansă în plus, un atu, sau ar putea să se integreze mai repede decât Ucraina? Sau merg în același timp?
No, you're not going to persuade me to say something like that, because that would be a highly political statement. And in fact, I'm not familiar enough with the process. What I can say is that these two countries are candidate countries. They became candidate countries on the same day. And if you look at the situation on the ground, one of them is a very large country, and one of them is a rather smaller country. One is a country which has an ongoing war on its territory. The other is not, although there are other problems in Moldova, as we all know. They will pursue their own paths separately. They have to do that separately. I don't know who will get there first, if that's the question you're asking me. Or maybe they will arrive at the same time. Honestly, I can't say. Obviously, it's a neighbouring country. It's one which has important historical ties with Romania, and with this part of Romania in particular. And I know we're very close to the border here. And I think the advantages for all concerned, both for Moldovans and for Romanians, particularly in this part of Romania, would be enormous when this can happen. But there will be very complicated, very technical negotiations to go on for quite a long time, obviously, for the country to be ready, for either of the countries to be ready to join.
Ultima întrebare, ne apropiem de final. Știu că ați participat astăzi dimineață la Universitatea Alexandru Ioan Cuza din Iași la dezbaterea Împreună pentru democrație, Europa mea, viitorul meu. Care sunt concluziile întâlnirii cu tinerii studenți ieșeni?
Well, one of my key conclusions, as always when I do these events, is to feel better and more optimistic about the future. When you see the energy, when you see the mindset of the young people in the room, you see a bright future for Europe, because the mindset is more European, it is clearly interested, it is motivated, and these young people want to do something about the situation in which they find themselves. They are not uncritical. We received a lot of questions this morning. Some of them were implicitly quite critical of the current situation, but that is what democratic debate is about. And I think what came out of this whole discussion today was that we all need to be involved, we need to be active. It's no good sitting back and expecting someone else to do the heavy democratic lifting. You need to get involved yourself. And certainly part of what I was doing was to encourage these youngsters to do exactly that, which means, yes, voting in the next European elections. It means voting in all elections in which they're entitled to vote. It also means the day-to-day business of democratic politics. It means being involved in the NGOs that support the causes you believe in, whatever they might be. It means holding your elected representatives accountable for what they're doing on your behalf when they get elected and they get sent to Brussels or Strasbourg or wherever they get sent. It's about being active, an active participant in the process. And I think that came across very strongly. And I was certainly encouraged when I saw the attitude in the room to all of those things. And I think, as I often think when I come out of these events, if the future of Europe is in the hands of these people I saw today, then I can relax.
Îmi doresc doar să aveți dreptate, optimismul dumneavoastră să fie adevărat, la alegerile de anul viitor să nu vedem o prezență deloc scăzută sau așa cum ne-am obișnuit la ultimele alegeri. Și până data viitoare vă mulțumesc frumos pentru prezență și pentru interviu. Numai bine, la revedere!